He had promised himself that he wouldn't turn around. Not this time. But as his footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor, and the door behind him began to close, he hesitated. Just one more look. One last glance, even if it tore him apart. And that was the moment he regretted forever. For Can Yaman, that night was not scripted. There was no camera, no lighting crew, no director calling the shots. It was real, raw, unscripted emotion. And it came at a time when his life seemed like it was soaring, yet something inside him was crumbling. It all began 2 months before that moment. 2 months before the last look. At that time, Can was at the peak of his international fame. From Italy to Brazil, Turkey to Spain, his name was everywhere. Paparazzi followed his every move. Magazines speculated about his next project. Brands lined up to work with him. Yet amid all that noise, there was silence where it mattered most, between him and Demet. They hadn't spoken in months. Not since that last project. Not since the whispers about a fight backstage. Not since the night they walked out of the same event and went in opposite directions. But it wasn't always like that. There was a time when just being in the same room made everything else disappear. When laughter came easily. When words weren't needed because their eyes said everything. And for Can, those memories were like anchors. No matter how far he tried to sail, they pulled him back. He would lie awake at night, scrolling through old photos. Not the ones fans saw, the polished, filtered, magazine-worthy shots. No. He stared at the candid ones. The ones she didn't know he took. The ones where she was just being herself. Laughing at something silly. Fixing her hair without realizing he was watching. He never deleted those. And then came the event. The one they both had to attend. A charity gala in Istanbul. It was important, and they both knew it. They also knew the media would be watching closely. It would be the first time they'd be seen in the same space in over 6 months. Can arrived early. Not because he was nervous, at least that's what he told himself, but because he needed a moment. A moment to prepare. To breathe. He looked sharp. Perfect suit. Controlled smile. But inside, his thoughts were racing. Would she come? Would she even look at him? Did she hate him? He didn't know. But he knew one thing, he missed her. In a way he couldn't put into words. When Demet walked in, everything else faded. She looked breathtaking. Not because of the dress or the makeup, but because she carried herself with that same quiet strength he had fallen for long ago. And yet, she didn't even glance in his direction. That hurt. Worse than he expected. Throughout the night, he watched from a distance. She smiled politely, made conversations, posed for photos. But she never looked his way. Not once. Until the very end. It was almost midnight when Can stepped into the hallway, ready to leave. He had told himself the night was over. That it was fine. That maybe they had both moved on. But as he reached the exit, he heard her voice. Soft. Behind him. Can. He froze. That one word. Just his name. But it was enough to make his heart stop. Slowly, he turned. And there she was, standing just a few steps behind. Alone. No cameras. No press. Just her. Her eyes were glassy. Not from tears, not yet. But from everything that hadn't been said for months. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, I waited. That night. You said you'd call. He remembered. Of course, he did. The night everything fell apart. The night she texted him, asking if they could talk. He had replied, I'll call you in 10. But he never did. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid. Afraid of what she'd say. Afraid it was already over. Afraid he'd hear in her voice what he feared the most, that she no longer loved him. so he didn't call. And now, here she was, finally telling him what that silence meant to her. "I waited," she said again, her voice cracking. "I know," he replied, his own voice low. There was so much he wanted to say. To explain. To apologize. But the words stuck. Instead, he looked at her, deeply, as if trying to memorize everything. The way she stood. The tremble in her hands. The way she avoided his eyes for a second, then met them head-on. And then, he turned. He started to walk away. 5 steps. 6. 7. And then he did it. He looked back. Just once. Just one final time. And that image has never left him. She was still standing there. Still hoping. Still waiting for something more. But he didn't go back. He left. And that was the moment. The one he would replay over and over for years. He told himself it was for the best. That maybe silence would hurt less than trying to explain a heart that was still bleeding. But he was wrong. That night, after walking away from her, Can sat in his car for almost an hour. The driver waited silently. He didn't ask questions. Can just sat there, staring out of the window, replaying every second. The look in her eyes when she said, "I waited." The crack in her voice. The way she didn't try to stop him, even when she clearly wanted to. That was Demet. Proud. Strong. Never one to beg. Even when her heart was breaking. And Can had broken it. Not with loud arguments or dramatic betrayals. But with silence. With the calls he didn't return. The texts he never answered. The walls he built when he was hurting, hoping she'd tear them down, even though he gave her no key. He leaned his head back against the seat, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Why didn't I just say something?" It wasn't the first time he'd asked that question. There were so many moments before. So many chances he didn't take. Like that day on set when she had been unusually quiet. He had noticed. Of course, he had. He knew her too well not to. But instead of asking, instead of holding her hand and saying "Tell me," he had made a joke. Tried to lighten the mood. She had smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. That was the first moment she started to drift away. He could see it now, so clearly. Every time she reached for him and he didn't see it. Every time she opened up, and he closed off. Every time she gave a piece of her heart, and he hesitated. He thought they had more time. He thought love would wait. But love doesn't wait forever. Weeks passed after that gala. They didn't speak. Can busied himself with projects. He flew to Rome, shot commercials, signed deals. Smiled for cameras. Answered interviews with charm. To the world, he was thriving. But at night, when the city lights dimmed and the applause faded, he was just a man staring at a dark ceiling, wondering what she was doing. Who she was thinking about. If she was forgetting him. One night, he got close to calling her. He opened the chat. The last message from her still sat there, unread for months. "Let me know when you're free. I just want to talk. No drama. Just us." He hovered over the reply box. Typed, "I'm sorry." Then deleted it. Typed again, "Do you still think about me?" Deleted again. He shut off the phone. Coward. A few days later, he was in Milan when he saw it. A photo. Demet, on a rooftop. Smiling. With someone else. He didn't recognize the man at first. Just that he was standing close. Too close. Her shoulders were slightly turned toward him, like she felt safe. Like she trusted him. Can's stomach twisted. It shouldn't have mattered. They weren't together. He had no right. But it felt like someone had pulled the air out of his lungs. He zoomed in. Her eyes. They looked lighter. Less guarded. Like maybe, she had finally stopped waiting. He closed the app. Tossed the phone onto the hotel bed. Punched the pillow. He had no one to blame but himself. He had broken something beautiful. And now someone else was holding the pieces. That night, he drank alone. He wasn't proud of it. A bottle of wine became two. And somewhere between the second and the third, he called an old friend, someone who had seen him and Demet during the early days. Back when they were still just colleagues. She loved you, man, the friend said. You knew that, right? Ken didn't answer. I saw it. Even when she tried to hide it. You were the only one who could get to her. Ken whispered, then why did I let her go? There was silence on the line. Because you thought love would wait, the friend replied gently. But she was waiting alone. The next morning, Ken woke up with a headache and a decision. He had to see her. Even if she hated him. Even if she didn't want to hear a word he had to say. He needed to say it anyway. He flew back to Istanbul without telling anyone. He didn't post a single story. No PR team. No paparazzi knew. He wanted it to be private. Real. He went to her building, waited outside in his car for hours. She never came. Later he'd find out she had been in Cappadocia, shooting a short film. He left a note with the doorman. Just 3 words. I still care. He didn't sign it. Didn't need to. She would know. Or maybe she wouldn't. And that brings us back to the last look. The moment he turned around at that gala, and saw in her eyes the last flicker of hope. A flicker he didn't chase. He had the chance. Right then. To walk back. To take her hands. To say everything he hadn't said. But he turned, and walked away. Now, every time he closes his eyes, he sees her standing there. Still. Not angry. Not even sad. Just, disappointed. And that is the image that haunts him. Not because she left. But because he let her. Ken never told anyone about that night. Not his friends. Not his family. Not even the people who asked gently, "Are you okay?" Because how do you explain to someone that the moment that broke you looked so small from the outside? Just a look. Just a hallway. Just silence. But in that stillness, his entire world shifted. Since then, months have passed. Projects came and went. He gave interviews, smiled on red carpets, even joked with fans. But there's a quiet he carries now. A gentleness in his tone when he talks about love. A pause when someone mentions Demet. Because she was never just a co-star. Never just a chapter. She was the one who waited when no one else did. And he was the one who didn't show up. Now, when he thinks of her, it's not the grand gestures he remembers. Not the premieres or the headlines or the gifts. It's the small things. The way she hummed to herself in the morning. The way she always carried an extra hair tie and offered it without asking. The way she would rest her head on his shoulder during car rides, even when she was pretending to be mad. Those were the moments that built a love. And those were the moments he let slip through his fingers. Sometimes, late at night, he still writes her name in his notes app. Just her name. Over and over. As if writing it enough times could bring her back. He stopped waiting for a reply. He knows now, some things, once broken, don't get fixed. Not because they can't, but because too much time passed. Too many chances missed. Too many calls that were never returned. And love? Love doesn't leave loudly. It fades quietly, in the pauses between what's said and what's not. In the moments where someone needed you, and you weren't there. A few weeks ago, he saw her again. By accident. At a bookstore in Bebek. He was with a friend, browsing. She walked in alone. Their eyes met for half a second. She smiled. A polite, distant smile. Then she turned, walked to another aisle. He didn't follow. He didn't call her name. He just watched her go. And this time, he didn't look back. Because now, he finally understood. The regret he carried wasn't about what he lost. It was about what he never gave. A moment that lasted 5 seconds. A moment that rewrote everything. A moment he still lives inside, every single day. Because sometimes, the loudest heartbreaks are the ones we never hear.